Good evening, sir.
This is episode 86 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast with your host, Brett and CH. Today's topics, got a great show for you guys. We've talked about this before. Is institutional money finally coming? The Block had an interesting article that they put out about hedge fund Renaissance Technologies. We're taking a closer look at Bitcoin, and our boy Novogratz made a little bit of a comment there. So I thought that was interesting to talk about. Oil markets just went absolutely insane in this last week. And I thought it was an interesting topic to talk about because of how we always hear people talking about intrinsic value, and intrinsic value. And all of a sudden the price of oil went negative. So where's the intrinsic value in that? And how does that compare to, let's say, a digital commodity? And then last but not least, there was a really great clip of Ray Dalio talking about, a new reserve currency coming. What's the issue right now when you think about reserve currencies and how those transition to the next or multiple currencies over time? We've only seen a few changing of reserve currencies in, I guess, all of recorded history. So it's a fascinating time to be alive to witness something like that happening. I mean, absolutely unbelievable. But we have not recorded in about a week or so. I was actually moving last week. That totally threw us off in trying to bang out an episode there. But how you doing, man? A lot's happened in the last week.
You know what? I'm alive, and as I said, I don't know if I've said in the podcast, but I've become more of an optimist in the past weeks than I have ever been, in a sense that, we made it through this, and I think this woke up a lot of Americans and people around the world in general to, one, watch how quickly your rights get taken away, and people just waking them up in that sense, and two, how overly, just how fragile everything we have is. Our current system is so fragile. We're 1 month into this, and we can't go there's no way the U.S. can go 2 months with this. If we close down through May, there won't be anything left in the U.S. It'll be ruined. I hate to say it, but, so that's just reality. But getting back to it, how you been besides for the moving?
Yeah, no, it's been a wild week. It's funny because the weather's starting to turn. It's like 80 degrees today. All I want to do is go outside and mess around. So I'm going to probably take a little walk after we're done recording here and enjoy some of the weather. But yeah, I mean, it's just been the wildest week. And I guess we're going to jump into oil after our first topic here. But yeah, surviving. I'm becoming very optimistic. I agree with you that it feels like the economy needs to be opened back up, and whatever way, shape, or form that ends up looking like on a go forward basis is fine. But it's I think everything's blowing over to the best extent that it could. So I think everybody's done with quarantine, to be honest with you. I've seen more people out in the last week than I have in the prior 3 weeks. I mean, I'm looking out my window right now and there's just cars driving by like crazy. I think everybody's kind of had it. So I think that's very positive. It's good news for sure.
No, it'll be interesting to see when things open up, just the rush of people. I feel at least the younger, when I say younger, I mean people probably 50 and under. There's people who just want to go out to bars. They want to go to restaurants. They want to go out and do shit. It's just that, it's that simple.
Yeah. No, it is as simple as that. Definitely. But let's jump into this. Let's just jump into this topic. Is institutional money finally coming? It's been one of my favorite things to talk about for the last year and a half now, because I feel like it transitioned from the when ETF meme to is institutional money finally coming? And we talk about this all the time. Is it finally coming? Novogratz tweeted something. There's more macro people getting into Bitcoin, stuff like that. So it feels like they're coming. And then you get this report out from the Block who's talking about this $75 billion hedge fund, Renaissance Technologies, is taking a closer look at Bitcoin, right? And in one of their recent regulatory filings, they said one of its funds would have the ability to buy Bitcoin futures on the CME in their medallion fund. And surprisingly enough, their medallion fund was up 24% year to date. So not too bad in one of the craziest years, it's probably just in market history. And CME futures has been they kind of slowed down since March of this year, probably due to that huge pullback. Everybody decided to take a break for a bit there, which definitely makes sense. But it seems like that big pullback that we've discussed back to what was it, 3,800 or so, that would happen a few weeks ago. What a great opportunity for anybody who was like, if you were going to take a position of any size around now, would probably be the time to do it, or at least 3 weeks ago. And Novogratz had retweeted it and made his similar comment that more and more hedge funds are now seeing BTC as a valid investment instrument. This is adoption, and it's happening at a steady and now accelerating pace. Many hedge funds have been arbing the Grayscale fund, and that's the Grayscale's investment trust, which I like.
Sorry.
Oh, can you hear? Can you hear
yes,
cars
you can
flying
hear
by?
Yes. So sorry. Before the podcast, we were talking about how he's like, okay, there's gonna be like Aventadors, RH just driving by. It's just gonna be loud. And I was like, dude, it's like the perfect time to have like a supercar. The roads are empty. It's nice out. It's getting nice in most of the country. And I was like, it's literally like driving in Need for Speed with like traffic settings on low. That's where we're at now.
That pretty much is exactly where we're at. And the sound of V8, V12, V10 engines flying by my window is all the validity I need to know that people are starting to get back outside. But I'm sitting here. There's trillions in QE happening, buybacks, buyouts, saving hedge funds, giving millions of dollars to institutions. The printing press is on at full tilt. And if you're going to sit and say, I need an unseizable, non-sovereign, hard cap supply, digital currency in my basket of portfolios, like this is the time when that narrative starts to make sense, when the printing press is really on. So do you think now is as good a time as any for any smart money who's willing to kind of roll the dice here? Is this the time to start looking at that? Do you think they're finally coming in?
Yeah, and what's interesting thing I was thinking about that before we went off a tangent there quickly was one with I have the CME futures filled up and I have the gaps, and I was thinking, because we've talked before, like Mustap Murad, Willy Woo's hedge fund blew up and they were trading on BitMEX, I presume, right?
Yeah, they didn't say one way or another, but I'm assuming so. That's where they got.
My question is, I wonder if more of these institutional-esque eventually decide to go trade at places like BitMEX, Deribit, and I don't know what other ones are big and popular, versus trading on a CME. I get the CME is all licensed and stuff, but because of think about the gapping aspect, you're screwed for 1 hour a day at like between 5 and 6 p.m. I'm pretty sure they close. I could be wrong, but I know for gold and silver and everything else, it closes at 5 to 6. I'm checking now. I don't think, you're screwed in liquidity sense. And on certain holidays, think about that. Versus normally with Bitcoin, you can convert it to whatever you want at any time of the day, no matter what the conditions are. And I was just thinking, like, how long do people want to risk that versus being able to just liquidate whenever? You know what I mean?
No, that's a good point. When I'm thinking about institutional money, smart money, large dollars getting into the space, on one hand, sure, I could see them wanting to go with CME futures. Doesn't trade 24/7. Maybe you have a little bit more trust in that, or maybe if you can see on the screen right now, maybe you're going with Grayscale's Bitcoin Trust, GBTC, and even Novogratz had said they've seen funds arbing GBTC. So I don't know. I'm assuming they're using that, holding maybe the underlying somewhere else, catching the spread there. But I think it's a good thing if we see the premium start to go down on GBTC. Maybe it'll start to smoothen out a little bit there. But even with GBTC, I've heard of a few investment advisors or FAs who, that would be their go-to recommendation for a client who was interested, right? It's easy. Yeah, sure, you're going to pay the premium, but if you need exposure right now, today, that's probably the easiest way to go about it. Yeah. And whether you like Barry Silbert or not, and all the stuff that they do or their shitcoin funds, it just is what it is. They need to be able to have that option available to the people who are not going to sign up for Coinbase, Kraken, Gemini. God forbid they're going on BitMEX, anything like that to try to get exposure. You need as many different options for people to get exposure as they can. And I had written this topic a couple of days ago, and now I feel totally different about talking about it, because the narrative around that, we did an episode on it, that like that 1% to your portfolio, that 2% to your portfolio of Bitcoin, and how it can, give you pretty much outside gains for very, very little risk in the grand scheme of things. Even if it went to zero, what's 1%? We just saw oil go to zero, literally.
Negative $40 a barrel.
And I guess I don't know, maybe this is a good time to talk about this a little bit more, maybe transition into oil conversation, but it seems like now is as good a time as any. I wouldn't, if you would have told me a year ago or a year and a half ago when we started recording this, that 20 days into the halving, oil prices would go negative, we'd be locked down globally here, couldn't go outside, and people are getting bailed out left and right, I just wouldn't have believed you. So it's almost like the perfect storm. The narrative around Bitcoin won't make any more sense than it does probably right now.
Yeah, at this point, it's become we've seen from so many, whether it's gold bug, I wouldn't say gold bugs, but more so macro people who have exposure with gold, stuff like that. Even stock people, just Bitcoin is included in every conversation now. Why? Because it survived, and the longer it survives, as we talk about the Lindy effect, the more it just shows up in our conversation. Everyone knows about Bitcoin now. So when Bitcoin goes to 20K, which most likely will, I could be wrong, but when it most likely does, the amount of people that will be flooding the market is going to be unsustainable. It'll be that simple. I pulled this chart and I distorted it a little bit. I took it off the auto, and so you could see 100. Even if Bitcoin doesn't go to 100K per se, GBTC could reach 100K easily. Bitcoin could go to 50K, and GBTC could do double that. It did it in the last run. Bitcoin did 20K, and GBTC did $39. So, this could get ridiculous here with this type of thing. And I'm not saying this is not financial advice again, but these type of things, we're seeing all these markets and distortions, like we saw with negative oil. We're seeing probably the USO oil fund blow up because of 30% of their fund, their net asset value of the USO ETF was the June fucking oil contracts, which just started to plummet after the May expired, which I think May expired today, or technically yesterday, or whatever, depending on where you are. But this is the ultimate shit show. It's fucking great, and I think that might be a sense of my optimism. I think people are waking up to the reality, just normies, because I don't know about you, and I know this is the oil topic now, but I had, I think two dozen messages, between DMs, texts, whatever, about oil, trying to long short oil, all retail, of course, and it was insane. Everyone decided to become an oil trader within 24 hours. Why? Because of volatility. What do we talk about? Numbers, price drives adoption. Numbers go up, numbers go down. They drive adoption. Everyone wanted to long oil.
It's such a good point you bring up, and I forget which episode we talked about. I think one of the theme was volatility drives demand or something like that. And when I saw what happened with oil, and I guess should we be a little bit more clear about what happened for any of our listeners who
do you want to explain it, or you want me to explain it?
No, go for it. Why don't you talk through it?
So basically what happened, I'm not an expert in this at all, but I'll try to break it down to layman terms as easy as possible. And if you see on YouTube, you're watching this chart, this is a CFD on crude oil. So I think it follows the contract of the current month. So right now it's stuck on the June contract. That's why it's at $13.91. But anyways, basically what happened was the May contract was set to expire 4/21 or 4/22. I don't know the exact date. Long story short, right now there is very little demand for oil. There is a surplus of oil everywhere. That is why the price of oil, I will zoom out here, has been going down for a few months now. Major thing was coronavirus, obviously. Everything is shut down. So you have surplus, like super tankers are full, depots are full. Everything is full of oil. And I think it's Cushing, Oklahoma is where it takes the oil, like where you deliver the oil, or whatever. And they're full there, from what I heard. And so basically, what happened was there's a bunch of people speculating in oil. They don't want to fucking take this oil. They don't, because it's the burden of having to actually, like, as they're saying, you get a phone call, and you, like, after the contract expires, and if you own it, like, where do you want this oil delivered? Like, they're going to deliver you oil, barrels of oil. Like, it's ridiculous. I know it sounds absurd, but that's what happens. And so there's people who were willing to get out, literally pay people to get out of these contracts because they did not want to take delivery of the oil. Because if you're like had, I don't know, a few thousand barrels of oil, and that's not what you do, and you never take delivery, you're doing whatever you can to get the fuck out.
Right. And what are you going to do with that?
Yeah. So everyone was getting out at any price they could. And that's why it only shows 0 on this chart. But I brought open the crude oil from Market Watch because they showed the negative here. Let's go to the 5-day chart. And prices, it was the craziest thing. I was just watching the chart, and it's so scary because you're seeing this happen. And someone said it perfectly. It's like you see that happen. It's like, and that's why I mentioned to you before. It's like we don't know if one day we're going to wake up and gold's going to be like $3,000 an ounce. Like We're just going to wake up and like as Lawrence Leffert had mentioned on our podcast, the London gold pool in the 60s when that imploded in 1968, and that was the beginning of the end of the dollar backed by gold. And who knows what's going to happen next year? Like seeing things like this happen in oil, it's like, and we're already seeing volatility everywhere across all assets. It's just ridiculous. It just it goes to show anything's possible. It's like, and the guy mentioned perfectly. It's like, and he said it like basically, if you think you're going to just be able to just trade your dollars for gold, silver, Bitcoin, anything like that, when the time comes when everyone, just like coronavirus, think about how quickly everyone went from not caring to caring. It was a giant S curve. I wish I could draw it for you guys, but basically I probably could actually if I did it on the computer. But it's an S curve adoption. And long story short, it's
when you hit that tipping point, right? It just accelerates.
Exactly. I was just trying to get to the tipping point. It accelerates, and the same thing's going to happen when everyone in the world realizes that if you're holding fiat currency, you're fucked. You better have hard assets. You better have things that actually produce income or fucking have real value: gold, silver, Bitcoin, real estate, businesses that produce income, etc. Or even, stocks are risk assets, but still, this is going to get ridiculous. I don't know when it happens, but it could happen in a matter of weeks.
Right. And I think that's a scary thing, because I think this goes to why we always say we can't wait for the next Monday to record again, because you don't know what's going to happen the following week. And when we recorded, I guess, a week and a half ago, I don't think oil prices going negative or going to 0 had crossed my mind last week. And now it just happened, and just can change so quickly. Thinking about oil prices going negative, and I think you nailed it perfectly. They were willing to not take delivery, so you'll just sell it at any price, right? Because you don't want to take delivery. What are you going to do with thousands of barrels of oil? Where are you going to put them? And I saw a couple of memes from like Trust Fund Terry of saying like, tell mom, like, don't worry about the oil that's getting delivered to the house, blah, blah, blah. Like, you're going to sit on this oil. And it made me think about the difference between holding something physical and holding something digital. And that concept of taking delivery, whether that's oil, whether that's gold, silver, the difference between the two is the physicality of them. And I know it sounds really obvious, but I think it's important to remember, because when you're talking about real assets, and Bitcoin falls into this category, how much more expensive is it to hold oil or hold anything physical compared to holding something digital, right? And I think watching oil go negative could be the beginning of that narrative of, there are pros and cons to something being physical and something being digital, and it's important to understand the risks of both.
Oh, that's 100%. You nailed that. The physical aspect of gold, like you and I both know, if you had to leave a country and you wanted to take a majority in your net worth with you, there's no way you'd be able to do it in gold or silver. Gold would be a little easier than silver because you obviously it's whatever, $1,700 an ounce right now, but still you wouldn't be able to carry like $30 million worth of gold with you if you had a high net worth per se. Is my point. But you could put your whole net worth on a fucking digital stick like a Ledger Nano S or a Treasure, and that weighs nothing and that adds nothing to your get out bag per se, and you're gone. Right. And you could have like a lot of your net worth on that, or so it's a different aspect.
It's and I don't want to throw that in gold's face or anything physicals, just to shit on it, but it is an important distinction because I have a feeling that gold bugs become good Bitcoiners, and Bitcoiners might even become good gold bugs if all of a sudden they become interested in gold. I could see that happening. And you start understanding the differences between the two. And Quote the Raven, I watched him on a podcast with George Gammon, and he's like, yeah, the Bitcoiners would always say to me, like, what are you going to do with your gold at keeping it at home? You're just going to hold it and pet it? And he was like, fucking yeah, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to hold my gold in my hand because I have it. It's physical. So, on one hand, it's such a good thing. Gold's physical, right? You can hold it, you can use it, and then you have the same exact thing just in the digital space, and it's it's just easier to transport, but you can also, maybe it's easier to lose. I don't know. They both have their trade-offs, but just, I don't know, I thought it was important to mention watching oil go negative because people don't want to fucking hold this stuff just made me it just reaffirmed why I could see people starting to look to something like Bitcoin because the cost is just so low to hold it, right? Theoretically.
Yeah, no, it's a lot easier to store. Like you could use much smaller safe, and it's easier to move around. But I was gonna say with Quoth the Raven, his real name is Christopher Irons, but with him, what's funny is he's like just as much of a conspiracy nut as me, and not really conspiracy. We just actually really read history and go down scary rabbit holes. And he's not a Bitcoin guy. That just blows me away. I mean, he's obviously a hard money guy, whatever, but it just blows me away. For as much as the conspiracy guy he is, he's not a Bitcoin guy. It just doesn't.
Yeah, when I listen to him talk with George Gammon, George had brought it up, and he wasn't saying that he wasn't a Bitcoiner. He's just like, I think he just prefers gold, and he doesn't have anything against holding both. And I think that's the first step. I could see him, I don't know if I'm sure he was talking about it in 2017 for sure, but I could see someone like that changing their mind over time, like Ben Hunt, Epsilon Theory. He doesn't see a place for Bitcoin, but he gets along with Bitcoiners very well because everybody's on the same team. Burn it the fuck down mentality, the debasement of the currency, all this stuff. Like, they get it. And I think I just listened to him on a podcast episode with Marty Bent. It was pretty good, but it's the same thing. I think, honestly, if I wanted to tweet this and I didn't, like, who tag somebody who you think will become a Bitcoiner after the next bull run? And Ben would be one of the people I would think, because, say Bitcoin goes over 100K all of a sudden, and he won't need to think any differently about it. He'll be like, okay, maybe this is a good idea. Maybe this will help in the concept of, I don't know, restructuring society, or however the fuck he sees it. I could see someone like that starting to turn, and I could see someone like Chris also turning, right? Price needs to go up enough. You need to see enough happen with it for you to think it's a viable alternative. And I guess we can start moving into this topic about new reserve currencies and
oil.
Yeah, I mean, I read a thread earlier today that was, everyone's starting to pontificate, what does the future look like in terms of reserve currencies? And this guy was making the argument that why wouldn't it be more than one thing after this? If you lose so much trust in fiat currency, and all that, which it looks like it's just degrading, even though the dollar is getting stronger, because relative to the other fiat shit coins, I guess it's pretty good and in super high demand. Maybe you could start seeing baskets or multiple things, or different countries using different things. China's been accumulating gold. Russia's been accumulating gold. Individual people have been accumulating gold. I mean, everybody is starting to get the sense that the party's over here for fiat currencies, at least, if not now, in the decade to come, right? It feels like it would start to make more sense that we're at this breaking point. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's it's interesting. There's obviously there's a lot of people that are bearish in the dollar, but I think some people put it well. There's high demand for dollar right now, and like you can even just look at the dollar chart right now, and it's been crushing it for a while now. Like it had a hard dip, but then and obviously it's went down over time. But I think, as you said earlier, I mean, there's demand for dollars. That's how everything is paid right now. It's the reserve currency of the world. People want dollars. It's the most it's the most liquid asset out there right now. There's no way around it. Whether gold, Bitcoin, silver, oil, you name it, dollar is the most liquid asset. I mean, and what's next after the dollar is probably euros, pounds, Swiss francs, because those are, again, a lot more liquid. It's a lot quicker. And I don't mean to say that you can't quickly liquidate Bitcoin, but, and again, if you're trying to use pounds, British pounds in the U.S., people probably won't accept them. But you get what I mean. If you're, depending on the country you're in, now again, if you're in Venezuela, Bitcoin, dollars, gold go a lot farther. So it really depends on where you are. But for the most part right now, like in major countries, it's the liquid asset is the fiat currency. But U.S. dollar right now is the most liquid one because it's a reserve currency. It is the greatest weapon of the U.S. empire. Most people haven't figured that out yet. They think nuclear weapons, aircraft carriers are powerful. Nope, it is the U.S. dollar, my friend.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because it's easy to obfuscate that, to not believe, think, or understand how the reserve currency, the money itself, is such a powerful weapon, especially when you can start excluding other people from the economy by excluding them from using the currency. And it is super scary. And I think that's why I'm so bullish on an open currency, right? Anybody's free to use it. You just have to get some, and you're good to go. No permission necessary. But what do you think? Should we play this clip from Ray Dalio here?
And Cash is trash. Ray Dalio, February 2020.
Yeah. Let's all right. Let's roll the clip, and then I'm curious on your take.
In the years ahead. As far as the short-term debt cycle or the business cycle, we're 10 years into this expansion, and many of those stimulants that happen will be dissipating. We won't have more interest rate cuts that are material. You won't have more tax cuts and so on. And this is true around the world as we have our obligations. So we're coming into this period that is sort of a big sag. Not a debt crisis in that way, but a lot of obligations that are coming at us, particularly in the mature reserve currency countries. And they include pension obligations, healthcare obligations, and the like, large deficits, which will have to be monetized. They'll print money to deal with that. There's a reserve currency issue. And then, of course, we have the external conflict, or the issues of the rising of a great power in the form of China rising, and the United States having its let's say, relative decline. So we're at a point, I think, that is very similar to 1944. There's a war, after a period of war, there's a period which there's a peace, because nobody wants to fight the country that has and won the war.
Yeah, so basically what Ray touched on here is, and I can see where he draws this analogy. When you think of the U.S. in the situation of war, I mean, we don't think about America, but we've been at war. We're still in war in Afghanistan. But, again, it doesn't, affect us here like it does with World War II on the home front. But, like, even with the Iraq war, I mean, we spent trillions of dollars over there. And at some point, I think everyone's going to call bullshit on the dollar at the same time, and along with every other fiat currency. And it's going to be, again, just like overnight, everyone's going to kind of be like, oh, maybe these fiat dollars that, these digital dollars in my bank account and this cash isn't worth as much as I think it is. And, again, it'll be the people who own all the hard assets and whatever that make a lot of money. It's going to be wild to watch, and I don't know when it's going to happen. It's really hard to time these things. Again, in the grand scheme of things, it's a small time frame, but in reality, it might be 3, 4, 5 years away, 10, I don't know. And that's a long time frame for you and I, but in the grand scheme of things, it's a small time frame. Like,
right, it's nothing.
You have to.
I saw him mention that it felt similar to 1944, and I guess talking about Bretton Woods and things like that. But how do you compare that with why this wouldn't feel more like 1929?
And then you talk. Well, that's a good question. I think he's referring to the 1944 part, more for the monetary system, and I don't know if that's where you're trying to get at, but because in that situation, like they realized that there had to be a new system for how we're going to restart the world here, with the current. And I think people are realizing that too. I think we're saturated in debt, and people do realize that the system is teetering, and that something does have to change in our monetary system. And is it going to be some kind of gold back currency, or is it going to be something silver backed? Is it going to be something Bitcoin backed? I don't know. I'm just throwing out, random possibilities right now. My point is that's what, if it was your question versus 1929, I think if you're asking why he sees it as 1944, because that was just in the sense of there was a need for a monetary shift because everyone's fiat currencies were worthless around the world. And so they had to restart everything and like link everyone's currency to the U.S. dollar. So each of these each of these banks in like England, France, etc., would hold U.S. dollars, and that was their gold back per se. And then each U.S. dollar was backed by X amount of gold, or 35. It was 1 ounce of gold to $35 was what it was, which of course was a joke because they were inflating the currency. And people finally, with the London gold pool breaking, which was basically you had the Vietnam War and Johnson's Great Society with a bunch of aid and welfare programs that just obviously strain. You can't support those programs with basically out having huge margins, aka lots of profit for your country, or printing money. It's one of the two.
Right. The math doesn't add up, and then you get the inflation, and it comes in because you keep debasing the currency. I find it so fascinating that all of the new world order, new reserve currency talk that Ray Dalio does, he specifically leaves out Bitcoin 100% of the time, and a lot of people have not called him out on it because he never responds, but it's almost like he keeps saying things that are hinting towards that direction, but he won't explicitly come out and say it. And I guess if I were Ray Dalio, I wouldn't either because I already have heavy bags, or maybe my kids do, and you don't want to tip anybody off, or because maybe he doesn't want to look like a fool if he's wrong. I can see that being a reason why I wouldn't talk about Bitcoin either. But I think it's so timely that he keeps mentioning new monetary system, things like that. And when, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but when you and I sit back and think about this kind of stuff, I think, okay, well, I know there's demand for dollars. I know that they're going to print money and continue to debase the currency, but people will still flock to dollars. So eventually, when everybody realizes maybe you don't want to hold dollars and you want to hold something else, how does that switch or transition happens? And now I'm starting to think, well, maybe it would make sense that maybe the new reserve currency doesn't become just one thing, or it becomes one thing over a longer period of time, and many different countries are going to try their own thing. So we see China talk about central bank digital currencies, right? That's one way to do it. This is a topic for another episode, so we'll touch on it more. I saw like a screenshot of like one of their digital wallets, and it just had a picture of a bill in it, right? So there's that. Everybody knows fiat currencies can work because nobody questions it, so you can just give them out. And then you have other technologies, even like Tether Gold. Like Tether Gold doesn't sound that stupid if you want like a gold-backed digital currency, whether you trust it or not, and you're dealing with trusted third parties. Yeah, I understand all that, but people trust Tether right now anyway, and it just kind of is what it is. So all of a sudden, as you're seeing things become tokenized, whether it's digital dollars, digital gold, digital silver, Bitcoin, whatever the case may be, I'm starting to expect those five, say, start to compete against each other like shortly. And when I say shortly, I guess I mean within the next decade, because we're just seeing unbelievable things going on here with oil, dollar, gold, Bitcoin. I mean, what a tremendous time to be watching
Equities,
yeah. I forgot.
bonds, everything. Everything's volatile. I was going to say something, and I know I'm more of a military history nut per se, but when you think about like war in the 20th century, for the most part, a lot of it I feel like it's so fiat war, because you think about these wars, and they're not there to conquer territory or anything. It's just it's groups fighting each other a lot of times. Like when you think about the Vietnam War with the U.S., like fiat funded. I know we had a gold at dollar time, but we were printing money to fund that. There's no way we fucking dropped more bombs in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam than all of World War II. I mean, granted, Vietnam was a longer war, but still, it was incredible. I mean, the amount of air power we used in Vietnam is incredible, and I say that it's mind-boggling. But and so in that sense, the Soviets were doing something that was very, I don't know if you'd say unproductive, but since they were communists and socialism, they wanted didn't want influence of the U.S. NATO nations, and they were obviously printing money, sending funds, supplies, etc. to support another cause. And then the same thing happened in the fucking 80s with Afghanistan, to reverse the roles. This time, the U.S. via the CIA was funding, U.S. tax dollars are printing money again. The Mujahideen, who became our enemies in the Taliban like a decade later, not even, like 5 years after the fucking war ended in Afghanistan in 1990 when the Soviets withdrew. So my point is, and there's a bunch of other wars. There's so many fucking wars there's the Rhodesian Bush War. Again, another war that most people have never heard about, where Rhodesia honorably defended with an FNFALs, I'm getting really specific here, defended their country, Rhodesians, which if you don't know the local Rhodesia, it's near South Africa. It was a part of the British Empire, but they seceded off at one point. They defended against Soviet and Chinese-funded, basically terrorists, which were, I think, basically Africans, but they were funded and trained by those guys. So again, just wars that have no point, but obviously lots of death and just free money sloshing around, paying for all these. Because guess what? I can tell you, guns, ammunition, tanks, planes, mortars, RPGs, they aren't cheap. They aren't. Funding an army isn't cheap. There's nothing cheap. You need food, water, oil. Nothing is cheap about that. So I don't know. I want your take on that. That's my thoughts.
Well, this is one of my favorite topics to jump down, because I think it's the single biggest leap that a Bitcoiner or a sound money person can make when you start thinking about the cost of war and how they're funded. And a lot of people like to meme the Bitcoin fixes this when talking about war, and somebody would say that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Bitcoin cannot stop war. That's absolutely ridiculous. But I think if you just take a second to think about it a little bit more clearly, and when you have done, a ton about history, way more than I do, especially from the military side, there's only one way to fund these wars. And the soldiers, right, the army, so to speak, they're expecting to be compensated. They're not doing this shit for free. And you can only compensate them in something that they're willing to accept. And if a money is being used, or let's say gold or Bitcoin's being used, and you need to physically pay your people in gold or Bitcoin, the chances of you actually spending, I hate to use real money, but I feel like it's more real than fiat, where you can just create it out of nowhere and give it to somebody. That's the only way you can fund a lot of this kind of stuff, because otherwise it's not profitable to go to war. You have to print the money to fund it, to then hand over to create the guns, the tanks, and everything, just as you said. And it's not cheap to do that. But if you don't have access to increasing the supply of money to then pay for those things, how do you fund them in the first place? If you needed to fund them with direct taxation, if every 2 weeks you and I had been sending our check to keep the war in Afghanistan going, it would have ended 18 years ago, right? It wouldn't have lasted very long. You would never allow that kind of thing to happen. And that's one of my favorite things to think about when you talk about, new reserve currencies, the changing of the guards, things change. People just can't imagine a world that they don't already live in. So it hasn't crossed anyone's mind, nor me, I guess I should say, that the dollar wouldn't be used as money, or it wouldn't be a reserve currency accepted everywhere. It hasn't crossed the majority of people's minds. And I think now certain people are starting to think, oh, holy shit, man, with maybe in the nenext 10 years where I'm using something else's money and I don't know how to feel about that. It's pretty nuts.
Yeah, I was going to add into that with it is crazy, but I was going to add in with the Rhodesian Bush War, because I've read a little bit about this, but it's something I really want to read in more. But so here's the thing, started July 4th, 1964. The end of it was 12 December 1979, 15 years. Now, it wasn't a high casualty. It was like over 10,000 guerrillas killed, over 1,100 Rhodesian security. I mean, it's lost lives, but So it wasn't super high intensity conflict, but still, that's 15 years of conflict and supporting sides. You know what I mean? And basically, at the start, so this again, Rhodesia was a colony of Britain, southern Rhodesia, and this is how it started. With Rhodesia basically eventually broke off from, it became an unrecognized country basically, and they basically defended for themselves because I don't know when they colonized Britain. I want to say they colonized in the late 1800s, 1880s. So like people's grandparents, you got to think about this, people's grandparents and maybe great grandparents had settled there and, built farms, etc., businesses there for 3 generations. That's a long time. People don't think about that. But that's a long time. Your family's been there for 80 years. That's a long time. And all of a sudden Britain says, fuck this country. We're becoming very PC. Fuck all our colonies. We're just fucking disassembling everything we did. The largest empire ever, we're disassembling it and destroying it all, and Rhodesia ended up being one of those territories. And the people living there are like, well, fuck, we can't just pick up. And so that's what happened pretty much. That's my short-term summary. But again, fiat money, it's just the center of all this, another conflict. And there's a million more conflicts, not a million, but there's a lot in the 20th century, again, funded all by fiat.
Right. I mean, it just, the amount of, you want to get really out there with this kind of stuff. The amount of productivity and progress that we would have seen in the last, call it, let's round up, say 100 years without this fiat nonsense and all the wars, all the bad startups, the businesses that were never going to be profitable, that shouldn't have been funded. I mean, I just feel like we would have come so much further just as a species in the last 100 years. There's almost just no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, no, it would be a different world. You and I wouldn't be alive because our parents probably would have never met, and just things like that would exist. Like if you think about that in a timeline, because sound money would have changed everything we have as a world today. It's just a fact. Like again, you can't fund ridiculous things without printing money, unless you conquer territory. Now, if you go conquer somewhere and you conquer all their gold reserve, like Iraq, like for instance, you could say Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in 1990 was strategically smart. They invaded a country for their riches and their oil. Pretty smart. I don't know about you. Obviously, the coalition forces came in and kicked ass, and that war was pretty short. But again, they did that on a resource basis. That wasn't just a war for no reason per se. I don't know. But I'm just thinking about that in that sense. And then also on top of it, I know I've mentioned before in past, I didn't mean to cut you off, that a big proponent people don't realize for the Iraq war in 2003 was Iraq was being a dingus and decided to sell oil for euros and not for US dollars. That's a big no-no. Don't do that. Dude, they fucking made money too. They bought the dip on the euro. And when you talk about like tens of billions of dollars probably, with the conversion of buying the dip in the euro, like your profit, even on like 15%. Oh.
No. Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, I mean, you really nailed it with it's a big no-no there for trading in currencies other than the US dollar. But, we're seeing that more and more. We're seeing oil contracts in other currencies now outside of the US dollar. And I cannot wait for the day when we're starting to see commodities like oil and gold priced in Bitcoin. Not, I understand that you can find the price in Bitcoin. I mean, like they're legit trading in Bitcoin. Like you're measuring oil in Bitcoin. And, a country like Russia or China is using that, right? And they're getting around capital controls. To me, it will be beautiful to see and just makes so much sense that it's time to move on, right? And I'm sure that narrative is going to get spun very horribly for Bitcoin whenever it does happen, that it's used by terrorists and the evil people on the other side of the world. I mean, I know that will happen, but it proves how useful it is. And I think that's where people like you and I and anybody listening to this, you need to kind of get ahead of that narrative before it comes, because you're going to hear the energy FUD will be coming next bull market. Believe me, the Bitcoins for terrorists narrative is coming stronger than ever, in the years to come. So it's your duty to kind of make sure you have your arguments nice and tight for that kind of stuff. Because the currency is going to change eventually, right? You and I, who the hell knows? Maybe a decade, maybe more, but it will happen. That's for sure.
Yeah, we're getting close again, I think, and that's maybe why. Because if you've been listening to this podcast, I'm usually the more pessimistic of the two of us when it comes to the outlook. But I think seeing this is kind of light at the end of the tunnel. That there's, okay, maybe even though there's still probably a lot of pain ahead in the road, we've begun the march downwards, which eventually leads to something else that hopefully will be better. And I think this will be a big wake up for the younger generations, which is most people that'll be in power soon. Will be the Gen X, the Millennials, and Gen Z. Really, I think it'll be a wake up call, because I think for the most part, when you think about Boomers, most of them will be out of the game by the time this all unfolds. I feel like for the most part.
Yeah, but as the decade continues, more and more retirements from the Boomer side. It makes a ton of sense. I think that's probably a good place to wrap this one up. This is a good episode. I'm glad we got to catch up and record one. We'll try to get a couple more recordings out there over the weeks. The halving is in around 20 days, less than 20 days. So I think maybe I want to do, we'll talk about that in maybe a week or so as we're getting close. Let's see where the price of Bitcoin is. And then maybe if we can even record one on that day, that would be fun.
Maybe we can record when the halving happens. We should be able to time it, right? What block? Just figure out what block it happens at.
Yep. Yeah, we'll be able to figure it out with that block. Depending upon the time it is,
we should be able to get within a close enough window.
Yeah. But this was episode 86. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. We do appreciate all the new subscribers and viewers on YouTube. That really, really helps. We do appreciate it. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Spotify. Shoot us a DM. Let us know what you want us to talk about. Makes it way easier for us to pump out the content that you guys want to hear and listen to or see. But stay safe out there. Try to get some sun if you can.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.